Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another podcast episode. I am Brian Schleifer here supporting Security Week, and we have an extraordinary guest on today, Edna Conway. Edna Conway is a globally recognized cybersecurity risk and supply chain resilience executive with more than 40 years of experience building security, governance, and resilience programs across major technology enterprises. She is the Chief Operating and Risk Officer for TPO and CEO of EMC Advisors, where she advises boards, governments, enterprises, and investment organizations on technology risk, cybersecurity strategy, third-party risk, and supply chain resilience. She previously served as Microsoft's Chief Security and Risk Officer for Cloud Infrastructure, where she was responsible for the security, resilience, and governance of the infrastructure supporting Microsoft's intelligent cloud business. Before Microsoft, she served as Cisco's Chief Security Officer for Global Value Chain, where she led strategy to assess, monitor, and continuously improve the security and resilience of Cisco's global value chain and third-party ecosystem. Her career also includes service as Assistant Attorney General for the state of New Hampshire and leadership roles across legal, engineering, business, and security functions. She has contributed to global security standards and public-private initiatives, including work related to supply chain security and technology assurance. She has served on multiple boards and advisory councils, including academic and cybersecurity-focused organizations, and is widely recognized for her leadership in enterprise resilience, cyber risk governance, and securing complex digital ecosystems. She was inducted into Fortune's Most Powerful Women community and is an appointee to the U.S. Information Security and Privacy Advisory Board. Good morning, Edna, and welcome.
My privilege to be here with you.
Yes, ma'am. Today, we're going to hit some exciting topics, and we are here to listen to your perspective and your expertise and background. And I guarantee people listening are going to get value out of every single minute and second. So I'd like to start off with your background, because I think it's imperative to know you and how you got to where you are. I think that's something that a lot of people want to hear about. We're going to talk about governance in general, and now with the rapid technology, how governance is just trying to keep up with everything. We're going to talk about cybersecurity at large for IT and any particular instances in OT you see that integration. A little bit about AI, right? That is the hot topic. It's out there. It's growing rapidly. AI's all over the place. LLMs, agentic AI. It's crazy being consumed in many organizations. And then finally, I'd really like to hear about the conversations you're having at the board level, some of those hot topics, how the budget is even looking at this from a technology rapid standpoint, because it's really hard. Moore's law is out the door. How do we plan budgets from this point forward? And then future technology, right? So we're looking at having data farms up in space. We're looking at the quantum computing is coming, how that's going to integrate with AI. They're going to complement each other. And then just what lies ahead. So Edna, I'm going to give you the floor, and I'd love to hear about your background from your perspective in your own words.
Brian, I so enjoy talking about myself, so I will be very, very quick. So I had the privilege of going to prosecute homicide cases straight out of law school, practiced law for a number of years, predominantly focusing on companies that did what you would call the core infrastructure of business. So think banking, real estate, and technology. A little bit of healthcare, but mostly tech. And then moved on to go in-house in the legal department at Cisco. Cisco had been a client, and I was very privileged to be invited to create a new organization on licensing in their legal team. And then moved throughout Cisco. After 20 years at Cisco, I think I had been in engineering, in supply chain, in legal, and in a special organization in operations where I departed from, which was the Security and Trust Organization, because Cisco had the vision years ago to sort of think about security and trust as something that spans the full spectrum of both the workforce and all of the customers and the third parties who partner with us. And I left Cisco because I was invited to join, and it was a special gift, Microsoft. And they were looking at the growth of the cloud and thinking about the fundamental infrastructure needs from a security perspective. Didn't really have a particular plan. And so I had the special privilege of writing the architecture for security and resilience. And when I say resilience, think about anything that you need to continue to deliver your business. So it could include not just security, but things like import, export, trade controls, human rights, labor rights, environmental sustainability, business continuity. I can keep going. And so I was lucky enough to be there for an extended period of time and built that architecture, and then decided that I had reached the stage in life where I wanted to do only that which I wished to do, and only with those with whom I wished to do it. And what a special privilege that is, which is why I'm talking to you, Brian, because that's a gift.
It's an amazing background, and I'm curious. So when you started the law side of the house, right, and you said that you started seeing that the technology and the criminal side, did that leap out at you initially? Was it just like that interest because of the dynamic side compared to more of like, I guess, the human? I'm not going to say it's static, but because any kind of like criminal side has some very intriguing, from a psychological standpoint, data points, if you will. So what like drew you into that technology side where you eventually carved your niche and kept going that direction?
I think the reality is, somebody asked me about this a while ago, and they said, what in God's name is the common thread across this? And I said, I think the common thread is I like to protect people. And so if you think about protecting them physically, protecting them emotionally, protecting them digitally, as we live in a world where we interoperate with technology now on a routine basis, right? I can't think of anything. I used to say work, live, play, and learn. And now I even say, I think we even love digitally. That's a sort of scary concept, Brian. But that's sort of the theme that sits throughout this. And I think the core personality trait that leads you to such a career path is sometimes annoyingly so, relentless curiosity.
When you started getting further along, right? Because we all have certain job sets require like certifications and all of those things. Did you find it interesting that people in positions were looking at certifications like, hey, you're like, I have a law degree. Why do I even need to look or have, like, do I really need to go take these tests? Did you have any thoughts about that? Because I'm always curious of that, people that transition from one main part of an industry or specialty into another. And they're like, I have the background here. Is it necessary for me to get these certifications? Or is it just like, I have the knowledge, look at my background and pedigree?
I was lucky. I sort of moved through a path where people came and knocked on my door, and I generally leap. I figure there's an opportunity. Somebody around me is smart enough to teach me. And in the course of that, that's a gift. But more importantly, even if I fail, this probably is, I'm leaping over the cliff, some kind of standpoint, or maybe even a tree branch that I can grab onto. So I'm not sure that it was as planned as it sounds. As it turns out, it was a wonderful trajectory. I do think I have a very strong view on certifications. I will take somebody who is curious intellectually and operationally capable and willing to learn any day of the week over somebody who is not, regardless of what your background is. Now, someone asked me the other day, does that mean you'd go see a doctor who doesn't have a medical degree? And I said, no, probably not. But there are skills that can only be acquired in the act of doing, in the act of failing, in the act of playing. And so I'm not so wedded to security certifications, because if you look at the way the pace of technology has changed, a certification from, in this day and age, 4 weeks ago, may not have addressed the current technology stack or environment in which we're actually working.
Absolutely. So I was curious, I know you're well read, and have you ever heard the book called The Alchemist?
I have.
Have you read that book?
I have.
So it's interesting because I have recently read it, and some of those things ring true from what you're saying, sort of like following like the omens for your own personal legend, right? Like if you remember that part of the book. And so it just sounds like that. It's like some people sort of hesitate, right? They get in that comfort zone and you're like, I'm going to leap, right? I'm going to leap with the faith of my confidence. I'm going to leap with the faith that like something else will come about if it doesn't quite work out. And I think that's very inspirational to see successful people such as yourself do that, because people are like, oh, they just sort of like got there. Right. And there's a ton of videos out there that people go interview very successful people that are like millionaires, billionaires. And it's like, how did you get there? And it's like, well, I didn't really follow the social norm, and I had some ideas, and people are like, no, that's terrible. How could you take an assistant attorney general and make her go into like Cisco? That'll never work out. And then like you're the proof in the pudding, right? You made a great transition. Like you said, you like that growth mentality and seeking out, intellect and knowledge that the universe provides us sometimes. Sometimes it's in books, sometimes it's through conversation. You worked with a multitude of teams. And a lot of that time, we have a lot of people with different personalities, and some like to think outside the box, and some are very black and white. And that leads me into our next topic, which is governance. We have a lot of technology that is moving fast and requires out of the box thinking, but we have governance that's coming from like the EU. Canada is actually having some new governance out there. The US is just trying, right, with the government just pushed some stuff out about quantum resilience and resistance and the new cryptography. I'm just very curious on, holistic thought you have on governance, whether that's just from IT standpoint and or the AI side of the house.
Yeah, I mean, governance is a big topic. Let's break it down. The reality is, I think the way you do it is you think about an identity. And an identity may come with a human, and you address that whole human. It may be a non-human identity, and you need to address the entirety of the capacity and the constraints you wish to put on that non-human identity, right? And so for me, that's where you start with governance, one. Number two, look, anybody who thinks they can do it all is, in my humble opinion, wrong. I'd love to meet the person who proves me to be completely inaccurate. But the power of a team in sync is the ability to mine capacity and technology in a way that allows you to draw on somebody telling me, use what you just said, Brian, right? What are the current pending, not yet enacted rules, regulations, legislation that I need to be aware of as a global operator? One, you can't mine that full time if you have another job. Number two, you probably can't read some of it because we all know legislation is not always written in the clearest set of language. And so I think that is an important fact to remember. But then you also need to say, can I even do this? And I'll give you and I have talked, we met talking about OT and physical interactions. And I'll give you a glaring example. Imagine a host of really talented people looking at infant mortality rates on digital devices that just don't make sense. And you can say, gee, something's not working right. What have we done wrong? There's no governance model for that. You first have to go investigate. And I was involved in one of those. And if you remember when Europe put out the restriction on hazardous substances directive, one of those hazardous substances is lead. Well, what's core to digital technology? In my view, the heartbeat of digital technology remains a printed circuit assembly. That's it. It's the board. The brain is the integrated circuit that's on the PCBA, right? And so that connectivity has a physical ramification, and it's only achieved by this wonderful old-fashioned thing called solder. And so I don't know how many people, I bet you have a soldering iron in your basement. We do. Right? And I think that people forgot that there was lead in tin lead solder, which allows the beautiful flow of electrical conductivity. Well, when you reduce the actual lead content to a certain minimum parts per million, it doesn't work so well. So now you're sitting and scratching your head saying, I never would have thought about that. And I never would have figured it out because the infant mortality happened long before restriction on hazardous substances. And why was I ready for that? Because this incident taught me that somebody had actually used red phosphorus and changed up what they were doing in our supply chain, and it had an impact. So all of a sudden, you become a data scientist. Isn't that a gift from God? But guess what? I needed a data scientist to look at me, and I needed to partner with them when Ross came into being to say, guys, we have to work on this now. What's the alternative? Do we go lobby for a difference? Turns out bismuth is not a bad alternative. But these are the kinds of things where I say governance is multi-parts. One, staying informed from a full spectrum of expertise. Two, preparing for, no matter how prepared you are, the inevitable that you never could have possibly fathomed that will happen. And 3, having a methodology to gather the people, the technology, and the action plan to deploy swift either mitigation or alternative methodologies to ensure that you keep moving forward, because business is about moving forward and delivering, whether your constituents are citizens for a government, for-profit institutions, look at their customers, nonprofits, look at those who use their services, and it's mission driven.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I was writing a paper for some of my academic stuff, and I actually did a table and looked at a lot of like the top level, more for the AI side. But there's a very heavy weight in some of them that are ethical, and then some are technical. And there was no aggregated governance. You would have to really mix some of those to hit the mark, right? And it's tough now, even while people are writing governance, because no one really like talks to each other, right? So you have like the NIST, you have the EU AI Act, you have like IBM had a plan for some AI, like everybody has this, but no one's really like aggregating and coming together for the unification standpoint. And so a lot of people, like you said, spend time and resources just trying to figure it all out. Not only that, it becomes compliance theater. It's like, great, we are checked off on all of this stuff, but are we actually secure? And the use case like that we have, right, is Target. If you remember when Target got hit a long time ago, they had just passed like a week before, I think there was their PCI or DSS or somebody like that, like compliance standard. And it's like, and then they got hit. And it's like, wait a minute. So just because we are compliant. So to me, it's very interesting because governance has to be very careful with that. Especially, I always like to use the analogy, it's like a 4-lane highway. Give me a 4-lane highway to play around in. Because if you restrict me to one lane in one direction, like you said, there might be some of those outliers that we have to take into consideration. And again, the adaptability, and that's the big thing that I'm a proponent of, is you have to have adaptability in governance, because if not, you're going to be stale. Like literally when you put it out, the next day it's going to be stale, just like you talked about the certifications and those standpoints. And so it's interesting. And then there's the statutory regulatory side of the house too, right? Which is like some that are, hey, I have a little leeway, and some are like, yep, by law, right? So those you can't really stray away from.
Let me interrupt you for a minute and make a point that's really near and dear to my heart. Governance is not compliance. So like you, I believe compliance is the lowest common denominator in any area. Governance is assuring an entire integrated ecosystem is both flexible and informed enough to adapt as needed to continue to deliver whatever it is that it is delivering. And more importantly, to simultaneously continue to evolve what it is delivering or understand new opportunities to deliver to serve those whom it serves. So that is a very distinct definition of governance. And a lot of people do get compliance and governance mixed up. And I don't think, you do have to check off whether or not you're compliant with certain laws, regulations, certifications that customers may want you to have. That is not what governance is about. Governance is about an operating model to assure that you are aware of, to the optimum extent possible, risk, and are building a resilient organization.
How have you seen or had conversations about governance with like geopolitical changes and shifts, right? So again, something comes up with one country and there's some conflict, and all of a sudden now there's new guidance like, hey, we cannot use that supply chain any longer from that respective, government, area, country, whatever. Just curious what you've seen over the time since you've dealt with it, through a couple of years now. What have you seen, and have other supply chain folks in the leadership role been privy to like, ooh, we need to have, because this is the thing, right? It becomes a sole source situation. Whether that's oh no, we no longer have copper available, or oh no, now we're at war with this respective country, we can no longer get that, and they don't have a backup plan. How many times have you run into that or had conversations about that through your tenure working with that?
Oh, pretty much every day. I mean, the reality is you're always aware of where your supply is coming from, what you need, what's fundamentally available. I'll give you 2 examples, one of which is very pressing. And if you know the former CEO of Siemens US, a wonderful woman also in the Fortune Most Powerful Women community, named Barbara Humpton, is currently the leader, CEO of a US company looking at rare earth minerals. Rare earth minerals are fundamental to our digital technology. There is a finite amount of rare earth elements on this planet. So thinking creatively about that utilization, stretching, alternatives, etc., is something that's really important. And so being aware of what do I need, and Brian, you know me, so you know that I always talk about lasagna because I can't help it because I'm Italian. And so fundamentally, if you're going to make lasagna, you need to use some kind of cheese. And everybody's like, well, what about people who are lactose intolerant, Edna? My answer is you may make something, but that is not lasagna. Lasagna needs to have ricotta and mozzarella. Okay. So there are fundamental bills of material, whether they're software, hardware, food, keep it up. We can keep going, that you need to have. And so being aware of that. But another example is, with all due respect to Mr. Musk, he is not the first person to think about data centers in space. While I was still privileged to be at Microsoft, we launched Azure in space. Now, you do find yourself sometimes when you're on the cutting, really bleeding edge of technology, that the folks that you can work with are limited. What do you do in that circumstance? Interesting. If you're a large institution, you might say, it may be in my interest to invest some money, and this will get to something you and I talk about, which is the three legs: academia, government, and private sector, to put some money into some innovation, whether it's an academic endeavor, another company, etc., so that you don't get yourself into exactly the situation you just described. The last thing you want is to be beholden to a single supplier.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate that insight. It is funny, like you were talking about alternatives, and it's interesting. I remember researching something a while back about a space elevator, and I want to say it was like Google Alphabet at the time had come up with it. And literally the whole concept was in place. The only thing that they truly required or needed was actually like the materials. And they didn't have anything on the current periodic element table that existed that could fulfill the actual ideology that they had. And that's also interesting too, because as we look more and more about the human race becoming multiplanetary, how that will shift and change. Finding other minerals that have other properties that will help bring and to bear maybe some additional speed or storage or things that we're not even aware of yet. So I find that like fascinating to me, is all of those things. Bridging the gap from like the governance side and now sort of, changing direction here to like cybersecurity. So cybersecurity has changed significantly over time to the point, one of my favorite questions, I even do this when I do like keynote speaks. I'm like, hey, how many people have had 20 years in cybersecurity? And people raise their hand. I'm like, you're all telling falsehoods right now. This is not the truth, because the word cybersecurity was not used 20 years ago, right? It was information security, information assurance, computer security, CompuSec, all these different, terms that have led into cybernetics, which, again, more of like the study of computers and technology, and now the security side, which is cybersecurity. So I find that fascinating. So you have seen that transition over time and all the technology and how that's implemented and helped cybersecurity. So I was just curious if you take a second and just sort of reflect on that journey and how you've seen where it started with like, oh, you probably need a password, like all the way up until, where we're at now, which is like, we're just fighting system thinking with other system thinking. Just a quick pause. This episode is sponsored by Security Week, the #1 most read cybersecurity news source and trusted destination for the latest analysis, expert insights, and digital content across the security community. Be sure to check out Security Week's phenomenal upcoming conferences, including the AI Risk Summit in August and the 25th anniversary ICS Cybersecurity Conference hosted this year in Nashville. Whether you're focused on enterprise security, AI risk, operational technology, or industrial control systems, Security Week continues to bring together the people, ideas, and conversations shaping the future of cybersecurity. Now, back to the episode.
But that's a week-long conversation, Brian. I think we have observed something that I always like to have a theory and have it either broken or proven true with empirical data, because at the end of the day, without empirical evidence, I'm drawing conclusions based on my own fantasies, which is not a really good model. But I do think that cyber, for me, suffers sometimes from the absence of holistic thinking. And let's be honest, you pointed out, well, I mean, we've been worried about information security since the day we started communicating digitally. I don't know. I think there's history, and I've looked it up once. Cyber is sort of a marketing term to some degree, but it tends to focus only on the information security. And I think you need to always drive physical security, logical, operational security, behavioral security. No behavioral, i.e. human and now non-human identity, as well as IP protection and privacy. Because at the end of the day, I always remind everybody, and it's like, oh, well, you're a capitalist, you're worried about protecting your IP so you can get money. And the answer is yes, that is true. But I'm worried about protecting the IP because that helps free it from a percentage of attacks that would be extraordinary, and I might argue would increase if we didn't think about the IP and protecting it, right? Just like I think about protecting people. So for me, the change has been probably threefold. One, lifting our heads up and saying the term is a great term, but you need to dig one layer under it and say, what does it involve in order to do it comprehensively? Two, how do we address both what used to be called cyber physical? I'll call it cyber physical, non-human, the whole kit and caboodle of what we're doing around identities and activities, right? So soon we're going to have, and we already see it in digital factories, robots doing things. Those robots are controlled in many ways, not only by software, but now perhaps some agents that are part of agentic AI's capabilities. So they have their own identity. They have agents somewhere else guiding them. And yet there's something happening in that factory that might need to stop or change or start. And there's a physical element to it. Right? And the third aspect of this is, for me, what I see as a really important part of the transition is a recognition that we can no longer do it in isolation. So it's hard to do things collectively. If you've ever tried to wordsmith a document if you've ever been on an international standard, I mean, you could write that document in 35 minutes. Add 10 people, 3 months. Add 100 people from multiple nations, you're looking at 2 years. So sometimes balancing the reality of how quickly do we need to move and have I included everybody is really important. And you have to come to some equipoise in the middle, because at the end of the day, if you wait too long, technology and or humans will have overrun you.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because it also has to do with resource allocation too, right? And I've done a lot of research on that to the point where small and medium businesses actually almost pay double for certain like OSHA standards and things like that in manufacturing. But more than that, like the cybersecurity side of the house, larger firms can, sometimes outsource or whatever else. So all the smaller to medium businesses are trying to hit these compliance standards, and they have people wearing like 20 different hats at the end of the day. And so it's intriguing to me that we are moving fast, and a lot of people or organizations are saying we have to use AI because we don't want to turn into BlackBerry, Radio Shack, Blockbuster, right? At the end of the day. And it's like, okay, let's do it. And then you have these people that are in place because you don't necessarily want to hire new people. And it's like, okay, do I hire somebody with this skill set of AI, or do I add and upgrade it, do some training for the people that I currently have, because they already have that team dynamic, which you spoke about. So now, that whole like forming, storming, norming, performing situation with team dynamics. So it's quite interesting. So it was a great transition going from like the cybersecurity side into AI, because now AI is integrated into cybersecurity. And I'm sure there will be another term that comes out shortly, right? Because there's already security harnesses dealing with agentic AI, right? Which is just like you talked about the identity side of the house. What can those roles do? What tools do they have access to? Where can they go from a data lake perspective and pull the data from, and the RAGs that go through the LLMs? So just curious from those conversations that you're having and what you're seeing now with this rapid transition with the AI side is like, okay, not only is it moving fast, we have to have people that have these skill sets. And so how are people approaching that? How are they getting the resources? Are they pulling from, like you said, the academic side? Are they trying to get classes and train up the people and get their skill sets for the people they already have in their organization? And what does that cost look like from a budgetary standpoint?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is all three. So if you watch anything in the news, the movement from one AI company to another AI company and who's losing whom and who's going where is intriguing. Intriguing probably only to Wall Street, I suppose, because at the end of the day, we all need to be capable of functioning in the society in which we operate. And I, for one, am really excited about artificial intelligence. Machine learning was wonderful. We finally got then the compute. You've heard me talk about this, actually, the compute and storage capacity that we needed to get to large language models, which speaks the language of humanity rather than the language of machines. Blending those two is quite interesting. And now I haven't built up my agent army yet, but I am playing, as everybody should be, in my humble opinion.
Yes.
With, just pick somebody to keep your calendar. And when I say somebody, I mean your agent. And the question is, I hate the word harness. Words matter to a lawyer because harness has such a negative connotation, doesn't it, to some degree? And I understand what it's intended to be. I'm harnessing your power. I'm utilizing it effectively. I'm building guardrails for you to move forward and not get distracted. So that's all the positive intent that's there. But I do think we need a lot more focus on blending knowledge of AI, how security works, fundamental digital concepts, and some plain old-fashioned practical human understanding as well. Because at the end of the day, we could still break things. And let's never forget, we're the ones who invented all of this. So I don't think it came down from heaven, fully baked. So there's a reality there that we need to be mindful of. I like agents a lot. Why? I posed a question. In fact, it was at a conference you and I were at, right? Which was the AI Risk Conference. And I remember sitting out at the dinner table with a bunch of people. And I said, how many of you think, this was probably almost a year ago now, Brian?
Yep, almost.
Yeah. How many of you think that there will be a single person billion-dollar company? I was like, can't do it. Nope. I was like, I think we'll see it. I think we'll see it by utilization of deep, rich mining of information, understanding it not only more swiftly, but in a more customized way, and an opportunity to deploy those non-human identities that can do our bidding in certain constructs better than we can, faster than we can. Now, you should be looking at me and say, you said the word before, which is cost, Edna. So you might be making $1 billion, but you might be spending $1.3 billion on token cost. Right? So balancing out where you use what. And I've not seen anything like what we're seeing now with AI, where we have so many flavors, right? I don't know about you, but I go to the supermarket in the US and say, one, I'm blessed to live in the United States of America. And, it's not showing on the video, but above my head is one flag, which is the flag I serve, and it's the flag of the US of A. However, I do think that we're seeing flavors that are more powerful and give us more power to make decisions. When I go down the supermarket aisle, I go, do I really need 32 choices of cornflakes? I want a breakfast cereal. I want it to be in flake form, and I want it to be made of corn. Okay, maybe I need one that has sugar, one that has cinnamon. I'm good. I'm done. That's 3 flavors, right? So it can be taken to excess, and I don't know that adds true value to a humanity, efficiency, and well-being. But I do think that you're starting to see with the large language models and the mining capability things like, if you saw, Anthropic just released recently Sonnet 5. Its whole purpose is to give Opus, I think 4.8 like capabilities at a higher efficiency, lower cost rate. So now we're starting to see folks use the technology in a business construct. Before we were just, it's new, it's great, and humans love shiny new objects, except for security people. We're always very wary, and we want to test it or see if we can break it. However, this is the age where what we're going to do is start to get choice about what we use and how. And so for me, I don't know how you could not be excited about this. Maybe it's just my disorder, Brian, but I don't think so. I mean, my goodness, what a wonderful time to live. Now, somebody should look at me and say, Edna, you've thrown some geopolitical issues on top of that, and it may not be such a wonderful time to live because it's empowered, those who would engage in nefarious activity with different skills and or pace to do harm. Yeah, that's true. But if somebody had never truly appreciated what you can do with cacao and made rich, dark Belgian chocolate, my life would be completely different because it is fulfilling beyond belief.
I love that. Now, I will tell you, I think it's very interesting what you said is now it's becoming more efficient. And like I use agentic, I have my own agentic AI team. Funny enough, I had built two. One was sort of like business strategy and the other one was doing some other stuff. And then they combined and they called themselves the Apex team. I literally have like a CISO, a CFO, a legal, like it's pretty cool. But then I also have like the technical side, right? I have like the software engineer and so on. And the stuff that it can do from the goal oriented, right? That's the difference is like now agents are goal oriented. And the vibe coding and building simplex stuff, such as like a PowerPoint, all the way to like a calendar that has some more capability to like a full blown, my buddy he built a CRM and I don't know a lot of people that have done something so in depth. It's a CRM. He owns a cleaning business. It's pretty large, but it has a mobile app that's included with it, and it's scheduled. I mean, it's astronomical. And I'm like, it took him like a month, and like you said, quite a few tokens. But if you look at, like you just said, from a business aspect and ROI, and I wrote a little paper on process mining. It doesn't replace the whole workflow, just sections, right? Those processes. He's going to start saving a lot of money, like 5 figures, by creating this because he was paying for something that existed. But it also, every time it grew, the finance would grow. Now he can do it himself. And so like that ratio of growth and savings is huge. And now we're getting that provided to us. So, and I think we as humans, like you said, we're barely dabbling in that. I really think there's some other people. I don't know if you know Clint, a buddy of mine, he's done some really extreme work, diving deep into like the memory side. So a lot of people have issues because it dumps memory. Like I tell my agents, save the state that you're in right now. Like save it now, right? Which is huge because I don't want it to restart because everyone's like, I have to restart a combo. It misses most of the stuff I was talking about. Because if you think about it, it becomes the background and resources. How many data farms exist that are out there now? They're building tons in, I think, Indiana, like giant data farms. And like you said, we have a finite amount of resources that are supplying not only the building, but the operational side for data farms, right? So we only have so much that can be like to cool it, right? There's 16 ounces per query on ChatGPT, I think was the thing I read a long time ago. And then power, they're breaking power and towns nearby are having issues. And it's like, okay, now we have to build mini nuclear reactors to run these data farms and interact with gas turbines that Caterpillar is building, right, to help power these things. And it's like the technology's there, just like we talked about. It's like, okay, but how many resources do we have to supply that? And so that leads into budget for me, right? So if we have the budget, it's going to cost so much, but as they become more efficient, I joke right now, I say, hey, where a good place for investment would be? How we're going to use these data farms when it goes from like a mainframe down to a PC, right? So we have these data farms and we're going to come out with something eventually that's going to make it more efficient. We're like, oh, we only need like, I don't know, a 99th of this data farm. What do we do with the rest of it? I'm like, oh, there's pickleball courts you can do. You can do all kind of cool fun.
Brian, the cool thing about that is thinking, if you think comprehensively, and somebody looked at me like I was absolutely mad when I said this, but I'll share it nonetheless. If you think about things in a 360-degree way. Look, we're not saying anything new when we say we need to have sources of energy, and then there's nuclear. And we said, well, if I were investing right now, I would be looking at who's been working on the myth that we've never been able to achieve, which is cold fusion. Imagine if we had it now. What could we do with that source of power and the absence of heat output, right? So we're doing it in stages, right? I mean, we had data centers, and then we came up with, liquid cooling, and then we came up with liquid cooling in certain physical contexts where, like, you put your entire rack inside of a cooling environment. Now we have cooling happening literally at the chip level as the chip operates and gives its orders. So I just think that is a glaring example of this comprehensive thinking, because cost is an issue. And even if we had an infinite amount of money, the reality is you don't have an infinite amount of resources until somebody figures out alternative places for us to live. Now, someone looked at that and said, do you think the robots are going to take over? Nope, not at all. I think we're entering a different age where we have to start to, and this goes back to a question you asked, and I regrettably didn't answer, so let me address it now, which is, how do you deal with the workforce challenge as we're speeding up what we need to know about? Just like you said, if you think you've been in cyber for 20 years, that's interesting. I've been in security for a lot longer than that, but it wasn't called cyber. And it didn't have all of the aspects of what we're doing today. I love people who are like, everybody's like, I'm AI native. I'm like, I don't think there's a generation that was AI native yet. We might have to wait for a few people to produce them. So they will come. But how do you deal with that reality? You have three choices. You steal from those who have the limited expertise because you want speed and you pay for it. You look at academia and say, what doesn't, we've been looking at this, and I had the privilege of talking with the Secretary of Education in her office a bit ago. What does preparing our workforce of the future look like at an educational level? And I don't mean graduate school or even post-secondary. What does it look like? What does kindergarten look like now? And everybody makes fun of me because I'm like, give your kids Duplos, Legos, and blocks. They're like, why? Because they're three-dimensional. And we operate in an OT, physical, and digital environment. And then move to the Legos that have electrical connectivity, right? And you can build things and you can give it controls. This is such a gift. And yet, there are camps and there are people who can afford to give their children that as gifts. But is it part of the curriculum? And I was in a room with 7 other academics, and everybody sort of looked at me like they didn't know what I was talking about, number one. And number two, I also said, and then what we need to do in the academic arena, in the post-secondary higher ed environment, is kill tenure. Stop. And I understand that there is a academic freedom and freedom of thought, and that's critical. But you don't have to give somebody the right to sit on their laurels for the rest of their life. There's a way to do it and incentivize it without killing freedom. Last time I looked, we still have some freedoms left in this country. People like to complain a lot. And we're coming up. What day is today, Brian? Today is July 1st, right?
That's
we're
right.
coming up on a really important reminder of the unbelievable experiment called the United States of America that we built. And it is on us to protect and preserve it despite all of our different views. And that those differences are our strength. Sorry, I waxed a little philosophical.
No, that was great. I know. I appreciate that. It's interesting. So I'm curious. So the skill sets, right? And part of that has to be budgeted out, right? Like you just said, I think you said hit the 3, right? Bringing people in, increasing the skills that you already have there, and then looking at just like the future, what that looks like. So when you're sitting and you're advising boards and you're having these conversations, how are they starting to budget that in? Because, before it was sort of like we could budget 3-5 years out. how are they looking at that and going, man, it's such the variables all over the place. There's no like stacked tier anymore of like, okay, 3%, 30%, whatever. It's all over. What kind of conversations are you seeing and or providing advice for in that instance?
I think, certainly sitting as a board director, you need to look at your executive team holistically. And I am encouraging people in this day and age to not necessarily have presentation from the CFO. There's basics that you have to have, yes, and then a presentation from the CISO and a presentation from the chief people officer. And I want to pick a topic and say, this is the topic we're tackling. How are we, and that's a very important word because people need to understand that boards are there to govern, guide, and challenge. But so many of us were operators. That is, in fact, the reason why we're sitting on the boards, because we lived the life. So how are we, the collective executive team, going to approach that, and what are we doing? And budgeting is one area. I'll give you a crazy example. I think energy is really important, and I'm going to budget X amount of dollars for research and development with academia on coal fusion. What do you think about that? Here's my premise why, and here's why it's justified from my engineers. Think we could do this, this, and this. I could save this, that, and the other. My supply chain folks tell me that the cost of what they're paying for raw materials, components, and or services will go down. Whatever that may be, if you weave that beautiful story, all of a sudden you can say, I'm willing to take that leap. Or you might look at it and say it's a leap too far afield because we don't have all of you agreeing, or we're just not there yet. And you mentioned, when we chatted earlier today, quantum. Quantum is this, go ask somebody when they think quantum is going to be. We've been talking about it for a while. When is quantum coming? Everybody has their date. None of them are quite the same. What we all agree on is it's going to be damn sooner than everybody thinks.
100% agree. Yeah, IBM has a roadmap to 2030, like drawn out already, like a website you can go check out. But there's some, it's and technically it's already happening, but not into the aspect I think that most people understand it, right? Like I think you can even pay to have quantum computing done, like high computing, which is interesting to me. And again, right, everyone talks about it because like, what was the big limiting factor? And it's cold, right? Being cold enough to operate. And I'm like, do it in space. And people are like, yeah, they're already thinking about doing that or whatever. And there's a lot that goes into space with degradation and the environment and all that. But it's like, yeah, if we're already doing this other stuff, right? Like as you stated, putting data farms and all that stuff up in space, like now we have that integrated thing. And that's, I love that you look at collaboration in general, because I'm a huge proponent, to the point where I even talk to technology or about technology like that, because to me, it's like AI, blockchain, quantum are big technologies that exist, and they can all complement each other. And as they grow and mature respectively, those integrations, that integration of those technologies is going to be astronomical, to the point where I think there will be another like evolutionary shift, if you will. I know you talked about like AI native, but that'll be another bump, if you will. But I don't think it'll be like a bigger wave bump, if you will, than just a steady slope climb. So yeah, I think it's coming faster. But again, I go back to saying this, or asking the question is like, you talk about that, but how does one say, okay, security is a niche, like, or a smaller aspect, if you will, depending on the context or the perspective that you're asking, of the holistic organization? Because again, it's all about ROI. So when you go advise these, your security professionals, depending on what they're called, right, CISO, CSO, CIO, that are going up, and speaking to the CEO and trying to get money through the CFO, what do you say? Like, hey, like you gave a really good example of like, this is how you're going to save money and make money. But what else have you seen that has made an impact holistically, sitting at the board and going, oh yeah, we should definitely budget for that?
This is how I'm going to keep the business resilient, period. So I would always showcase revenue that I protected, whether it was simple baseline. If I wasn't doing this, I wouldn't be able to comply with regulation XYZ, and regulation XYZ is required by 32% of our customers. Are you prepared to lose 32% of your annual recurring revenue? That's the lowest hanging fruit, right? The next one is, Here's efficiencies that I can add. And more importantly, let's just look at frontier AI models. The reality is the pace is going to change. And for years, we've all been talking about secure development life cycles. That's fabulous. You're relying on a best practice. You're relying on humans to do it. Isn't that really fabulous? And even vibe coding still gives us problematic code, right? So the reality becomes, well, I can actually look at that and I can make it tighter. I can move faster, and I need to do this, this, and this. So here's why I'm securing our future. So it's a shift in thinking we're way past red, yellow, green. I do think some things still really matter. How are you detecting and how are you mitigating and how are you preparing are important, but they have to have an end game. And I always look for that and I always present it. And that's what I tell people. And there are a number of folks out there. Security is this wonderful space. I'm biased probably, but I think we have a community that shares, Brian, far more than most other communities. Why? Because we recognize it is a collective challenge. We cannot do it if we're here and everybody else is here, or all of us are here and 3 people we rely on are here. We still fail, right? And so that's not true if you're investing in the stock market. It's okay to be up here, and if these people aren't getting it, oh well. But that is not the case in security. So as a result, we share because it's a collective protective effort. It is a fight that takes all of us. And everybody says, why do you always go back to war analogies? And the answer is because it is a war. It may be a positive war, but it is no longer something that you talk about with fear. It's here's what I'm going to enable. Here's how I'm going to protect where we are. And here's what I need to get us to the future.
Man, that's very well done. Very well spoken, Edna, as usual. So I think we're getting close to time here. So I do want to just let you have the floor because we hit all the topics that we initially set off to do. So that's good on us, Edna. I'd like to just give you a couple of moments for any kind of closing statements, anything else that you'd like to add.
Well, we covered a lot. And as usual, it wasn't good on us. It was good on you because you picked the topics and I came completely without preparation. So God bless you for taking me on the journey. I do think that we need to do a couple of things as a community. One, encourage looking at resiliency cross-functionally. So start to build risk and resiliency operating committees and make sure the senior leaders of every organization are there. And I said this to somebody recently and they're like, really, you want HR there? And I'm like, yeah, of course I want HR there. We need to have people, don't we? Last time I looked, they keep all the information about our identities. And if we're doing this right, we may actually see an HRMS that monitors the important criteria for non-human identities. We're like, oh, that's a security function. That's an IT function. I'm like, what's HRMS? I'm sorry. Last time I looked, isn't that a digital software platform? Okay. I think that is important. So move away from enterprise risk being isolated. It always sits under the CFO and that's okay for it to sit there. But I think expansive CFOs who are thinking ahead are thinking about risk and resilience operating committees. Note the word operating, how we operate in our environment, not how everybody else operates. The next thing is, I will leave you with this. If you're not talking to folks, I can't tell you, Brian, we talked about this a year ago, and I'm still working on it, the UN co-opting the treaty process by authoritarian nations. We've moved pretty far on that. The tech board is still leading the charge there. How many security folks go talk to government affairs? Do you know who your supply chain leader is? Are you coordinating in a way that is really important to coordinate? Do you understand inside the supply chain what the radiation hardening for software looks like? It's not so easy to do Patch Tuesday when you're past low Earth orbit. That's the second thing. And the last thing is, for heaven's sake, be not afraid. Open your arms, embrace it, trust in your colleagues, be curious. These are fundamental life skills that we need to bring to the table. and allow them to lead us on the journey as technology and capabilities and humanity continues to grow and change. For all it's good and all it's bad, we're in it together.
That's fantastic. And I do have my last question, right? This is unique to us because we do have to have a fun question at the end, right? I think that just it wraps it up. So I'm going to ask an easy one because we're friends, Edna. It's an easy one. So if you could have any superpower, and what would the superpower be?
Being invisible.
Invisible? Just turn it off and then I gotcha.
I would like to mine through environments without being seen so that I could learn more, absorb more, change a thing or two, and hopefully not wreak havoc.
That's awesome. And I really appreciate your time and you coming on this week's Security Week podcast.
My privilege.
Thank you.